Count your many blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God has done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings and see what God has done. Okay, guys, it is a Wednesday. First Wednesday in November. And we've got a video about football and the teams changing their location and their name. And I don't know why I have accent now, but that's okay. We'll just go with it. So today's race is going to be birds, because it sort of has to do with today's video. Well, sort of, kind of, maybe. Are you ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout out is for our friends. Let's see who it is today. I almost said it. One moment. Okay. There we go. Now everybody's lined up. Alright, let's see what she stole. There's Fox Clan. There's Ron. There's Haven. There's Rich and Leo. Principal. Ron. Distracted. Cheap. Wanya. Bluegrass. Jamaican. Ohio. Crazy. Ian. Moonsea. Lunch. Gloria, Nikki and Happy, Praying. And there's Northern, Bluegrass, Cal King, Jacob. Let's see, Richmond, Tammy, Carol, Blended, Martin, JB, Brits, there's Gazella, there's Van, there's Wit. There's Catching, there's Frugal, there's Glitter, there's Kizzo. Oh, it's going to be Frugal this morning, hang on. Okay, this is Miss Frugal, a Wellness with Frugal Mama, or as I call her, Frugal Mama, and she does a lot of wellness stuff, mind, spirit, unboxing, taste test, reviews. Here's a bristle product review, dollar store general couponing, lots of couponing here. We've got some shorts, affirmations, and then of course her lives, which is a lot of fitness and wellness and workouts. So if you are into wellness or frugalness, check her out. Like, share, comment. Have a good day. Okay, Mr. The Beaten Historian.
I'm going to be the beaded historian. I'm going to be Jamaica Man. Anyway,
braid your hair.
I'm going to braid my hair. I'm going to have 72 braids around the bottom of my chin. Anyway, we were looking through our history books because, you know, that's what I do when I'm totally bored. And Sue pointed out this interesting little tidbit, and I forgot that this event had actually come up in the history books at this time. I knew it was an event that had happened, but I didn't realize that, well, to put it mildly, the guy lit the fuse in the middle of a season, which is always a dumb thing to do. The guy's name is Art Modell, and football fans will know him very fondly, or anti-fondly, as the Browns owner back in the 80s. And what basically happened is that, you know, he was in control of a franchise in the NFL. The problem that they were having is that they were just having a time making ends meet. The stadium in 1975 was costing the city more than $300,000 a year to operate. Made a deal with Art Modell, signing a 25-year lease, which he had agreed to incur the expenses in exchange for quasi-ownership of a stadium. Hey, how'd you like to buy a stadium?
Quasi?
Yeah. Now, to do this, he would get a portion of the annual profits and capital improvements to the stadium at his expense. Modell's new company, the Stadium Corporation, would pay the city annual rents of $150,000 for the first 5 years and $200,000 afterwards. Now, Modell had originally never promised to move the Browns. He had publicly criticized other teams, the Baltimore Colts when they moved to Indy, and had testified in favor of the NFL in court cases where the league had unsuccessfully tried to stop Al Davis from moving the Raiders to LA. However, Modell refused to share suite revenue with the Cleveland Indians, who were playing at Cleveland Stadium at that time, even though some of the revenues were generated during baseball games. That's kind of a skinflint move.
That's just mean.
Well, in 1990, voters approved a ballot measure to build a new sports complex, the Gateway Sports and Entertainment Complex, which included a baseball-only stadium and an arena. Well, Modell, believing that his revenues were not in danger, decided not to participate in the Gateway project that had built Jacobs Field for the Indians and Gund Arena for the Cleveland Cavaliers. While Modell's assumptions proved incorrect and the Stadium Corporation's suite revenues declined sharply when the Indians moved out of their field over to Jacobs Field in 1994.
Oops.
Soaring player salaries put additional financial pressure on the Browns owner. Modell had claimed to lose $21 million in 1993 and 94.
Oops.
It's a good way to sink your profits. Well, due to massive and relatively consistent increases in the values of NFL franchises during the league's founding from 1920, the league had a long history of owners whose net worth was largely accounted for by the value of their football teams. Even today, many of the league's clubs are owned by business people or their heirs who, while relatively well off by the standards of the time, founded or purchased a football team which has since appreciated in value at a far higher rate than whatever other business interests might have originally been involved in. However, even with those considerations in mind, Modell's net worth had always been relatively meager compared to the other principal owners in the NFL, despite his long influence in league circles. Now, the Browns' capitalization problems dated to their founding as a charter All-America Football Conference franchise by a legendary coach, Paul Brown. Modell was recruited in large part because the NFL was desperate to avoid any perception of franchise instability within its ranks, especially in the face of competition with the then fledgling but well-financed American Football League, the AFL. My guys. As Cleveland had been decisive in ensuring the AAFC's relative success and eventual partial merger with the older league, the NFL, was keen not to lose market to a rival league. They had in 1946 when it allowed the Cleveland Rams to move to Los Angeles. Modell's purchase of the team was thus approved by the NFL under conditions that the league might otherwise have rejected. It was among the most heavily leveraged purchases in league history. Most of the funds used were purchased by the team or borrowed. Well, on one hand, the eventual negotiation of a merger with the AFL ended the prospect of an expensive bidding war for players in an era that true free agency did not exist, thus allowing the Browns to remain competitive on the field despite a tight budget. There were times back in the 20s and 30s, even up into the 40s in some cases, where teams, they had some of the strangest names. They had the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets.
Well then.
They had, for you Bugs Bunny fans, they actually had a team called the Maroons. There was there was Boilermakers. There was just all sorts of. And the thing that was crazy is some of these franchises had decent players, but then halfway through a season, when the budget started getting really tight, they would have to sell off their players to these bigger teams like the New York Giants or the Packers. And then those small clubs basically folded up and disappeared. Of course, back then there was also several times where they had problems with rules where you're not supposed to play pro football against college football teams.
What? Why not?
Something about sportsmanship and stuff like that, which is kind of crazy if you ask me, but But what wound up happening is that when the AFL and the NFL started playing at the same time, you started running into the risk of this club over here saying, well, yeah, we'll make you a first-round pick and we'll pay you $70,000. This other club across the way for the NFL will say, well, we'll make you a third-round pick and we'll pay you $80,000. And then we'll throw in some extra, sponsorship deals, stuff like that. Some of the bidding wars got absolutely ridiculous where they were meeting the college players under the goalposts after the Pro Bowl game was done. when they would get done at the Rose Bowl and stuff. And it was just crazy, And then, some of your bigger names at that time, that's pretty much the jockeying for position that happened with Joe Montana, who wound up going to the Jets and basically made history with them by the guaranteed Super Bowl. If I remember, I think Ken Stabler got into an episode with that, which was always funny. But then again, he also had a thing against the media, which was fun. But, the Browns, they came from a different league, a little tinier league, but at the same time, a well-organized club. And says on one hand, the eventual negotiation for a merger with the AFL ended the prospect of an expensive bidding war. Nevertheless, Modell spent most of his tenure as the Browns owner in financial difficulty, especially as interest rates soared and the cost of operating a team escalated with the value of the league's franchises. As the 60s came to a close, the Browns appeared in the NFL's final pre-merger championship game, but Modell's finances were so perilous that they were a major factor in his decision to lobby for the Browns, along with the Steelers and the Colts, to be moved over to the American Football Conference on the completion of the merger in 1970 for exchange for financial compensation from the other owners. Now, however, the $3 million payout, equivalent to $24 million in today's money, ultimately proved woefully insufficient to clear the team's growing debts. The Browns' financial situation led Modell to take legally questionable measures to remain solvent. For example, he tried to transfer liability for several personal bad loans to the Browns organization, prompting one of the minority partners to sue him.
Whoops.
And as early as 1983, Modell concluded he would never be able to pay all of his debts before his deal with the city expired. The loss of revenue from the Indians hit Modell especially hard. After realizing how much revenue was lost from the Indians moving out of the Cleveland Stadium, he requested a referendum be placed on ballot to provide $175 million in taxes to refurbish the outmoded and declining Cleveland Stadium. Now, on December 12, 1994, Modell told the board that he did not believe a referendum to raise the sin tax would pass, as proceeds would have been used to either fund a renovated municipal stadium or a new stadium. Modell then informed them that if the referendum failed, he would be finished in Cleveland and he would have no choice but to move the Browns. Now, entering 1995, the Browns, coached by a Bill Belichick, anybody remember that name, was coming off a playoff season in which they finished 11-5 and advanced to the second round of the playoffs. Speculation was that they would represent the AFC in the Super Bowl 30 at the end of the 95 season. And the team started 3-1, but then would lose their next 3 games. Now, while this was happening, Browns minority owner Al Lerner was privately prodding Modell to consider moving to Baltimore. He urged Modell to contact John Bullock, the newly installed Maryland Stadium Authority chairman. Early in the year, the league had told Bullock that the Baltimore would get a team, either by expansion or an existing team would be moved from another city, if the stadium was already in place. Now, elected officials in Baltimore and Maryland were still smarting from the Colts moving after the 83 season. It was so funny. They literally, oh yeah, there's no chance of us moving. Back up the trucks, guys. There's no chance of us moving, Don't worry about these trucks over here. Just keep backing it up.
We're not doing anything.
Nothing wrong here. Just ignore the trucks, A few Allied trucks. We don't know anything about Allied moving vans or anything. Um, well, the elected officials in Baltimore, Maryland were still smarting from that move. They refused to commit any money towards a new stadium unless the stadium authority secured a deal with the team. Now, you also got to think, this is mid-1990s. The Raiders were searching for another city. They looked at a couple places in California. There was talk of them going to Glendale. There was talk of them going back to Oakland. There was a talk of them staying in Los Angeles. And so there was speculation there. The Rams were thinking of seriously getting out of L.A., Anaheim. There was a lot of movement there. And so, it was a time of a lot of fluid constructivity as far as what these teams were doing. Now, with this in mind, Moog made several calls to Modell that went ignored for much of 1995. Finally, in late July, Modell allowed Lerner to meet with Moog, provided that Lerner stressed that Modell was not serious about moving. At that meeting, Moog laid out an offer in which the Browns would get the rights to a new $220 million stadium if they moved to Baltimore. However, Moog told Lerner to take the offer back to Modell only if he was serious about considering a move. Well, negotiations would continue in secret until September, when Moog told Lerner that if the Browns were serious about moving, you better act and act now. A few days later, Lerner, Modell, and Moog met at Lerner's Midtown Manhattan office, and at that meeting, Moog presented a memorandum of understanding that was almost identical to what he'd offered the Bengals a few months earlier, a deal that ultimately would have led Cincinnati voters to pass a referendum that built what would become Paul Brown Stadium. Indeed, some paragraphs still refer to Cincinnati rather than Cleveland. Oops. Modell still had some trepidation about the deal, but signed after Moog assured him that Baltimore fans would hail him as a hero. Well, soon after, Modell told the 49ers president, Carmen Policy, that he was moving the Browns to Baltimore. Policy had been well aware of the relations between Modell and Cleveland had become rather strained, and was secretly working with Pittsburgh Steelers owner Dan Rooney to keep the Browns in Cleveland. Policy urged Modell to sit down with the commissioner, Paul Tagliabue, in hopes of resolving the situation, but Modell rejected it out of hand. So, November the 6th, 1995, with the team at 4-5, Modell announced at a press conference at Camden Yards that he had signed a deal to move the Browns to Baltimore for the 1996 season. The team would play at the Colts' former home, Memorial Stadium, while the new stadium was being built. Modell said he felt the city of Cleveland did not have the funding nor political will to build a first-class stadium. The very next day, on November 7th, Cleveland voters overwhelmingly approved the aforementioned tax issue to remodel the Cleveland Stadium. Well, despite this, Modell ruled out a reversal of decision, maintaining publicly that his relationship with Cleveland had been irrevocably severed. The bridge is down, burned, and disappeared, he said. There's not even a canoe there for me.
How about a raft?
Yeah, in truth, the memorandum of understanding in September, he had even told Moog that signing it was the hardest thing he'd ever done and meant the end of our life in Cleveland. Years later, longtime Browns general counsel Jim Bailey told The Athletic that Modell was an emotional wreck when he signed that memorandum. Now, what else is going to happen but legal issues? Right away, the city of Cleveland sued Modell, the Browns Stadium Corp., the Maryland Stadium Authority, and the authority's director, John A. Moog Jr., in the City of Cleveland versus Cleveland Browns et al., Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas, case number CV 95-297833, for all those you keeping notes at home.
What?
For breaching the Browns' lease, as required the team to play its home games at Cleveland Stadium for several years beyond 1995, filing an injunction to keep the Browns in the city until at least 1998. Several other lawsuits were filed by fans and ticket holders. The United States Congress even held hearings on this matter. Comedian Drew Carey returned to his hometown in Cleveland on November the 26th, 1905, to host a fan jam in protest of the proposed move. A protest was held in Pittsburgh during the Browns game there against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but ABC, the network broadcasting the game and also the whole of Carrie's new sitcom that just premiered, declined to cover. They mentioned the protest. That game was one of the few instances where Steeler fans and Brown fans were supportive of each other, as fans in Pittsburgh felt that Modell was robbing their team of a long-standing rivalry. Browns fans reacted with anger to the news, wearing hats and T-shirts that read, "Buck Fodell." On the field, the Browns would stumble to a 5-11 finish after the announcement, ahead of only the expansion Jaguars, to whom they lost twice in the AFC Central, to become the first team in NFL modern era to lose twice to a first-year expansion team. Virtually all of the teams sponsored pulled their support, leaving Cleveland Stadium devoid of advertising during the team's final weeks.
Oops.
After the announcement, the team lost all of their home games except the final, in which they defeated the Bengals 26-10. The game itself was blacked out on television locally, but NBC did broadcast extensive pregame coverage from Cleveland. During the broadcast, host Bob Costas noted the final sad irony of Brooklyn native Modell moving a beloved franchise, much like Walter O'Malley had moved the Dodgers to Los Angeles. Now, interestingly enough, a couple things did happen after all this hullabaloo. There was a settlement that had to happen with the NFL. And in a way, I think it was a nice touch for the NFL to do this. When the franchise moved from Cleveland to Baltimore, I remember getting cards that actually said Baltimore AFC team. They didn't have a name for the team yet. They had a basic plain helmet. They didn't have a color design, anything like that. And it's because at that time there was no real idea what they were going to do. They weren't going to be the Baltimore Browns. You know, it just seemed kind of crazy. Well, what the NFL did was that they made a deal to basically put the Cleveland Browns into limbo. The team name, the team colors, the team history, the team record books, all that were basically going to be put frozen, suspended animation. They're just there. And then they also made a deal, since they had managed to secure this funding in Cleveland for updating or making a new stadium. They said, okay, when we get another vote up for a team, we'll put a new franchise in Cleveland and we'll rename them the Cleveland Browns. And as luck would have it, in 1999, a Cleveland Browns franchise would take the field again. Now, this new franchise, they later wound up adopting Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. They became the Baltimore Ravens. A number of players who stayed with the Cleveland Browns would transfer over to the new stadium, the new team, and played some really decent football. A couple times they would go on to the playoffs. Although I do think it was kind of funny because a couple of them actually wound up going back to Cleveland and playing for the new Browns when they were part of the old Browns. Now, interestingly enough, with the extensive talks, Modell, the officials of the two cities, came to terms. Interested parties had already expressed interest in acquiring the Browns, so it wasn't just, let's move the club, let's build a whole new team. Deactivated for 3 years so a new stadium could be built, revive the Browns team, find new owners. Modell was permitted to retain the current contracts of the players, so they were taking the whole team with them, which means the whole new team would have to be, drafted, positioned, and stuff like that. Some of you know about David Carr. Actually, it was Couch, different quarterback, still bad situation. The head coach would be replaced. Belichick was replaced by Ted Marchibroda. Interestingly enough, he was a coach of the Colts. Modell would change the name of the holding company from the Cleveland Browns Inc. to Baltimore Ravens Inc. Inky situation there.
Very inky.
And then the transaction was actually interesting. It was an establishment similar to the establishment of Baltimore's preceding NFL team, the 1953 to 83 Colts, who owner Carol Rosenblum had awarded the player contracts and related football assets of the moribund Dallas Texans. The Texans were dissolved and their history not claimed by the Colts, the Dallas Cowboys, or any other exempt franchise. Now, the settlement stipulated that the reactivated team for Cleveland, again, Baltimore's, the Browns' name, colors, history, records, awards, and archives. This is approved by the owners on a 25-2 vote with 3 abstentions. No votes were from Ralph Wilson of Buffalo and Dan Rudy of Pittsburgh. You always got to have somebody saying no.
No.
And the 3 abstentions were the teams who most recently had moved. The Cardinals, who went from Phoenix, they went from St. Louis down to Phoenix. The Raiders, of course, L.A., and the Rams, who went from L.A. over to St. Louis. Now, additional stipulation was that the Browns would be placed in the same division as the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cincinnati Bengals, so they could continue that rivalry, which is a good thing, too. Because some of those rivalries were just a beautiful thing to watch. And in 1999, the Browns were placed in the AFC Central with the Steelers, Bengals, they'd also have the Ravens, Titans, and Jaguars. And this rearrangement put teams from Baltimore, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh in the same NFL division for the first time. And then when they reorganized the divisions of all 4 teams in 2002, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and Baltimore would remain together in the new AFC North, while Tennessee, Jacksonville, Indianapolis, and the Houston Texans were placed in the new AFC South. Still not quite what sure to make of the 4-team divisions. It's kind of goofy.
It is.
I remember the good days of 5 and 6 teams. They just loved to beat the heck out of each other. Excuse me. Now, the only other NFL team to temporarily suspend operations without merging with another Cleveland previous team, the Rams, which did not field a team for the 1943 season due to a shortage of players at the height of World War II. Now, the return of the NFL to Baltimore compelled the departure of the city's existing professional football team. Interesting enough, the Grey Cup champions, Baltimore Stallions, of the Canadian Football League. Although they had drawn respectable fan support during those seasons, Stallions' owner knew his team couldn't compete with the NFL team, and in any case, they would have been evicted from the Royal Stadium to make way for the Ravens. Spiros opted to reestablish the Montreal Alouettes, a move that effectively ended the CFL's U.S. expansion experiment. The team assumed the name and history the team had previously played in the city of the Alouettes, which had ceased operations just days before the start of the 1987 season.
Interesting.
Yeah. But the probably the last memory that I remember when they moved the Browns out, there was a restaurant in Cleveland, and it always was very popular with the Cleveland fans, the players, the fans, the coaches. And when they moved that team out, they said, "Oh yeah, we still have an office for Modell. It's the men's room." So, but this has been the Bud Files, and we will see you guys next week, and you have a good one.
Bye-bye.